We continue now at the top of Daf 80b in Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 80b. On the previous summit, there was a machlokas amoraim between Abaye and Rava. How do you understand the Mishnah? According to Abaye, we understand the Mishnah simply that we only look at volume when it comes to changing the amount that you put onto a donkey. Let's say you hire a donkey in order to carry a load. So, for example, let's say a person hires a donkey to carry wheat, a certain volume of wheat. So if you add on 3 kav by a donkey, we say that that's too much. And if the donkey is damaged, then the renter is going to be liable. And that's true whether you add 3 kav of wheat or whether you add 3 kav of barley. It doesn't make a difference. Even though the barley is much lighter, but as long as you add 3 kav, you've added enough volume to cause a problem, and therefore you're going to be held liable. That was the opinion of Abaye. Rava said that is not the case. Rava said we take into account that the barley is lighter, and so therefore only if you have added volume plus it's the same weight, then you have a problem. And what it amounts to essentially is that you would have to add a saw of barley. Let's say you would originally be bringing a certain amount of wheat. So even though by wheat 3 kav more is considered to be too much, but when it comes to barley, since barley is lighter, so then it's about a saw more that is going to be problematic. And the Gemara is in the middle of bringing a proof from a brisa. So the brisa says if a person hires a donkey to bring a lesech of wheat, and instead they put on sheish esrei sa'orim, they put on 16 of barley, so chayiv, they're going to be liable. And Rashi explains sheish esrei is tosefes saw, that's about an addition of a saw, la'ashvosan l'masei hachit, and that basically is the same weight as the wheat. This seems to be exactly like Rava, and that's what the Gemara says, hashloshes kav in potter. It sounds like if you'd only add 3 kav, you would still be potter, taking into account the fact that the barley is lighter. So again, this is a question on Abaye. And the Gemara says, Tirgama Abaye. Abaye will answer, b'mechikta, that we're talking about barley. Machlokas here exactly what it means. We'll take a look at Rashi. So chayiv is chayiv b'shvil hanafach, again because of the fact that there's a greater volume, and it sounds like hashloshas kav and potter k'derava. You have to add about a saw. If it would only be 3 kav, then the person would be potter, like Rava says. And Abaye answered that we're talking here about barley that's mechikta. Rashi says b'mechikta ani shamati sa'orin shehisliu. I heard that we're talking about barley that had worms, and so since the barley had worms in that situation, we would say that you actually have to add a little bit more. Rashi says that's also the explanation in the Chuvas HaGaonim, the response of the Gaonim. But Rashi says to me, I don't understand. Mali hisliu, mali lo hisliu. What's the difference if it has worms or it doesn't have worms? You still have the volume of a lesech plus you have the shloshes kabin, v'katani potter, and it still says potter. Uli Abaye nafach kamasi, and according to Abaye, the volume is essentially the same as the weight. If you have an increase in volume, even if it's much lighter, it's still the same problem. To halav hisliu nami soron kalamim, even without the worms, the barley is lighter. Mechayiv lo Abaye mishum nifcha. That's the whole point. Abaye says the volume alone is enough reason to be liable, and so therefore Rashi does not understand that explanation. And so Rashi says, v'nir ali, it appears to me, shemasa hachamor lesech, that a donkey is able to carry a lesech, umedidasan tefufos tesvav soin, and that's when you measure tefufos, which means it's not such an exacting measurement. It comes out to 15 saw. V'lo mechukos. That's not talking about mechukos when you're measuring very precise. Umuki lo Abaye. So Abaye understands the brisa betes zayin mechukos. When it says 16 over here, what it really means to say is 16 saw that are mechukos, that are precisely measured. Shahamochak pachos gimel kabin. When you measure in that fashion, it's actually 3 kav less. Ve'in kanela tosefes nafach shalosh kavin shalesach tefufo. So what's actually being added on is not 1 saw, but it's actually just 3 kav. If you would have measured in the normal fashion, Rashi says tefufos is lo machak v'lo gadish. What tefufos means, it's like an average way of measuring. You're not measuring so precise, but you're not measuring in large heaps either. And so therefore, again, essentially we're changing. Abaye will interpret the way we measure in this brisa, and really the brisa is saying exactly what Abaye said. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, kav l'kosef, if you're talking about someone who's carrying on his shoulder, if you add a kav, that's already going to be too much. That's going to be considered that you have to pay for the damages. Adrev la'areva, if you add an adrev, which is a half a kor, that's going to be for a small ship. If you add that much, again, that is too much. Kor l'sfina, if you add 1 kor for a regular boat, that's too much. And shloshes korim levorni gadola, and 3 kor, that is for a large ship. And the Gemara says, Amar Mar, the master said, kav l'kosef, 1 kav added for a person carrying. And so the Gemara says, Emisa de lo motzi be, but if the person can't handle it, bar dasu, this person has intelligence, lishti, let him just throw it off. Why should we be responsible? The person should be responsible if he didn't throw it off of his shoulder. And the Gemara says, Amar Abaya says, B'shechav toli altar. We're talking about a case where immediately it caused him to collapse. He didn't really have time. Rava says, Afilu tema b'shalochav toli altar. Even if we're talking about a situation where it did not happen immediately, lo tzricha, it's necessary, ela la'agro yisera. Let's say the person wants to demand extra payment. Let's say he is able to carry it, but he can demand extra payment if it's a kav more. Rav Ashi says, Hu savar chul shehu denakadle. The person thinks, even though he has intelligence, he thinks he had a moment of weakness. He doesn't realize that the load was too much, and that's why you're responsible again if the person is overloaded. And the Gemara continues, Kor l'sfina, it says 1 kor for a regular ship, Shloshes kor in Lavorni Gedola, it says 3 kor for a large ship. Amar Papa says, Shmami, no, we see from this, Tam Sfinos, that in general ships can carry Bas to Losin Kurin, they're able to carry 30 kor. The idea over here is that overloaded is always 1/30th, so if 1 kor more is considered that you're overloading it, that shows that it can carry 30 kor. The Gemara says, Lamai nafkamina, what difference does that make? Lamekach umemkar, it makes a difference for buying and selling. You should know what the capacity of the ship is. And Rashi explains, Kav l'kosef, 1 kav for a porter who's carrying it on his shoulder. Kav have tosefes l'adam hanose b'kosef. The kav is considered that you're already adding too much. V'chayev hamose b'kilkulo. If the person adds to the amount, then he's going to be chayev if there's any damages. And Rashi says, Mikana talomid shamasa adam beinani shloshim kav. You see from here that in general an average person can carry 30 kav, shein chamish soin, which is 5 sod. Etnan tosefes hachamor shlosha kabin, shein chatzi so maso lesach tesvav soin. Because you see by the case of the donkey, you're adding 1/30th. Alma tosefes echad mishloshim b'masu. You see that the addition is always 1/30th of what the average can carry. V'yashminan dim hosef olav kav chayiv, and it's teaching us if you add a kav, he's chayiv. L'kamon paruch, the Gemara will ask further on, vario ben das, but the person has intelligence. If he's not able to handle it, he should throw it to the ground. And adrev le'areva, we said an adrev, which is a half a kor for an areva, for a small ship, that's a lesach. Have tosefes lamaso isfina katana, that's a lesach, is considered too much of a burden for a small ship. Kor have tosefes l'sfina beinanis, a kor is considered to be too much of an addition for a regular ship. And then the Gemara said one answer, b'shechav toli alter. The case is that immediately it caused the person to fall. Lo hispik lefarik hamasu me'al kisvo. He didn't even have time to get the burden off his shoulder until he was crouching beneath the burden. Bas tolos and korin, and then the Gemara said by ship, you see that the average ship can carry 30 kor. That's how it has to be able to go on the water with that amount. Like we said, the addition is always 1/30th. From the fact that it says the addition by a boat is a kor, you see that a ship carries 30 kor. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, all craftsmen are considered shomrei sachar. They're considered paid watchmen. Let's say they take raw materials. They're considered shomrei sachar over those raw materials that they're working on. Now, in all cases, let's say the craftsman says, I'm done, take what is yours, and bring me the money. At that point in time, already shomer chinam. At that point in time, they're considered to be a shomer chinam on the material. Shmor li ve'eshmor lach. Let's say a person says, you watch for me and I'll watch for you. So shomer sachar, they're both shomer sachar for one another. They're each doing a service for the other. Shmor li, if he says, watch for me, v'amar le, and he says to him, hanach l'fanai, place it before me, then the assumption is shomer chinam. The assumption is that he's a shomer chinam, he is watching for free. Helveu ala mashkon, let's say he lends him on collateral, and so now the lender is taking collateral. So shomer sachar, he's considered a shomer sachar on the collateral. Rav Yehuda says it depends. Hilveu mos, if he lent him money, shomer chinam. So then he's considered a shomer chinam on the collateral. He's really watching it for free. There's no pay over here. But hilveu peros, but if he lent him fruits, that's actually to the lender's advantage, because otherwise the fruits would rot. So there is a little of pay in a sense. So there, shomer sachar, he's considered a shomer sachar on the collateral. Abashol says, Rashai Adam Lahasker Mashkono Shalani. A person is allowed to rent out the collateral of a poor person, Lios Posek V'holech, and then he'll subtract from what is owed to him by the poor person, meaning as he collects the rent, he deducts that from the obligation, because that's like returning a lost object to the poor. Essentially, that is a benefit to this poor person who owes him the money. And Rashi explains, Kala umnin kablonin, again this refers to kablonin, they're taking pay for a specific job, hamakablan alein lasos hamlach bevatayim, they're accepting to do the work in their houses, shomrei sachar, they're considered shomrei sachar, l'schai beganeva v'aveda, they're chayiv if the objects, the material that they're taking is stolen or lost. V'tayim mefarish begamar, the reason will be explained in the Gemara, v'chulan shamru tole shalcha, at the point in time when they say, take what is yours, I'm finished, so then they're shomer chinam, shekvar gemarti, I finished everything, umishitotzienu havema, most, when you take it, bring the money. She'ini ma'akvo l'tovso al sechari. I'm not holding it on my wages. Harayu me'ata shomer chinam. At that point already, he's considered to be a shomer chinam. He's ready to give it away. He wants to get paid for his work. Hilveyu mos al amashkon. Now, if he lends him money and he takes collateral, he's a shomer sacher. Why is he a shomer sacher? Schar mitzvah. The reason why he'd be a shomer sacher is because there's a reward over here. It's a mitzvah to lend the money. And then we had the opinion of the distinction of Rabbi Yehuda, Hilveyu mos shomer chinam, that if he lent money, he's a shomer chinam. The less later Rabbi Yehuda schar mitzvah in Yandina. Rabbi Yehuda holds we don't count the schar mitzvah in terms of this halacha of what kind of shomer he is, but Hilveyu peira shomer sacher. But if he lends fruit, so then he's a shomer sacher, the derech peres laharkiv. By lending fruit, there is an advantage to the lender because the fruits would otherwise rot. Mutar adam lahaskir la'acherim mashkona shalani shabiyadu. A person is allowed to rent out the collateral of a poor to others. Lios posek olav schar v'holech tamen upoches menachov. And whatever he collects as rent, he'll deduct from the obligation. Of a Gemara mefarish be'ez mashkon ka'amar, the Gemara will explain what mashkon we are dealing with. And the Gemara says, Lema masnisin delok Rabbi Meir. Let's say that our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Meir. This is referring to our Mishnah, which says that this uman is considered like a shomer sacher. It's not like Rabbi Meir, who considers a socher, a renter, to be like a shomer chinam and not a shomer sacher. The Gemara here is comparing a socher to an uman because a socher has a certain benefit. He's able to use the item, but on the other hand, he pays for that benefit by paying the rent. Similar over here, this person is doing work, but he does get a certain benefit that he's getting paid for the work, and so therefore they're comparing a socher and an uman. And the Gemara says, the Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, socher, when it comes to a renter, ketzad meshalim, how does he pay? What's a renter considered? Is he like a shomer chinam, or is he like a shomer sacher? It's a machlokas tanoim. Rabbi Meir omer kashomer chinam. Rabbi Meir says he's like a shomer chinam. Rabbi Yehuda omer kashomer sacher. Rabbi Yehuda says he's like a shomer sacher. Again, the Mishnah seems to be like Rabbi Yehuda because we're considering the uman like a socher. The uman is considered to be a shomer sacher. The Gemara finds this difficult because Stam Mishnah is usually Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara says, Afilu Taim Rabbi Meir. You could even say that our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. Because in our case in the Mishnah, the fact that he is abandoning everybody else, so to speak, with that benefit that he's abandoning everyone else and instead he's hiring this person, so that's a certain benefit, that's a certain pay, so to speak, and that makes him a shomer sacher. The Gemara says, well, if so, sochanami, you can say the same logic by a renter. With that benefit that the person is abandoning everyone else and renting it to this person, have a love a shomer sacher, we should say it becomes a shomer sacher. There's no difference. And so the Gemara instead says, rather you can even say it's Rabbi Meir. He's giving him a little extra when he's paying him for the work. It's not going to be exact. So that little extra he might give him, have a love a shomer sacher. He becomes like a shomer sacher. That's the explanation of our Mishnah. But the Gemara still says, sochanami, when it comes to a renter also, milo askinim de kamash vilei tvei porsa, maybe by the renter also, he's giving him a little extra. Maybe he doesn't have to pay the exact amount of the rent. And so the Gemara instead says, rather you can even say it's Rabbi Meir. With that benefit, that he gets to hold on to the item in order to make sure that he collects his wage. Now again, he doesn't have to pursue the money because he's holding the item. That makes him a shomer sacher. That is unique by a case of a craftsman, and that's why it could be that our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. And Ibai saying, if you want, I could say kedemachlif Rabba bar Avua. Could be that our Mishnah follows what Rabba bar Avua said because he reversed the opinions. Vitani, he taught it as follows: socher ketzad meshalim. How does a renter pay? Rabbi Meir omer kashomer sacher. It's Rabbi Meir who says that he's like a shomer sacher. That would be in line with our Mishnah. That would mean the Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Yehuda omer kashomer chinam. According to Rabba bar Avua, it's Rabbi Yehuda who holds that a socher is considered like a shomer chinam. And Rashi explains, socher behema, one who rents an animal, ketzad meshalim, how does he pay? The shomer chinam and shomer sacher v'shol ksivi, because the shomer chinam, shomer sacher, shoel, that's all written in the Torah. Socher lo ksib, but it's not written in the Torah, socher. Umau din chiyuva lin geneva v'yaveda pater chayiv. So we don't know a socher whether he is chayiv when it comes to geneva v'yaveda or not. It's machlukas tanoim. Rabbi Yehuda omer kashomer sacher. Rabbi Yehuda says a socher is like a shomer sacher. Hoel ulahana also hu etzlo, because he does get to use the item like a shoel. Afal b'shanasan schar pulasa. Now, even though he's actually giving money, he's actually paying rent, shomer sacher is considered a shomer sacher. Di lo yoiv schar havishol, because if he wouldn't pay the rent, he'd be a borrower. V'chayiv be'onsin, he'd be chayiv in onus. Hashda di yoiv le'agar, now that he's paying the rent, lo have a shoel, he's not a shoel, he goes one step lower. V'hav a shomer sacher, he's a shomer sacher. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. And Rashi continues, Rabbi Meir omer kashomer chinam. Rabbi Meir says he's like a shomer chinam, de koyoiv agar melachto, because he's actually paying rent for the work, for being able to use it. Ve'ino notel schar al shmiraso, he's not taking any wages for the watching, and so therefore effectively he's like a shomer chinam because the use he's already paying for, and so the rest, essentially the watching is free, he's a shomer chinam. And Rashi notes, v'uman dami l'socher, a craftsman is similar to a renter, because he has the item, because he's going to get paid for doing the work, but he's not getting paid for guarding the item, he's getting paid for the work, so it's similar to a renter. Rashi continues, the koyoiv leit fei pursa, maybe he gives him a little extra by the worker. You can't make it exact what you're paying. That he's not taking any extra, he's probably getting a little extra. The Gemara says, same by a renter. Maybe he gave him rent. He's renting it to him for a little cheaper. In that case as well, he would be a shomer chinam, so you can't say that answer. And finally, Rashi says, if you want, I could say, even if you're going to compare an uman to a socher exactly, if you could always say our Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir, because we can reverse the opinions of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. We want to say that the Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir, because Stam Mishnah is usually Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "V'chulan shamru toles shalcha v'havei mos shomer chinam." By all the craftsmen, once they say, "Take what is yours and bring the money," at that point they become a shomer chinam. And the Gemara says, "Tanan hasam." We learned in a Mishnah over there. This is a Mishnah later on. Amar lo shoel shalach v'shilcha. If the shoel says send it, and the mashil sends the item to the shoel, v'meis, then it dies chayiv. So then the shoel is chayiv. It means to say that if the shoel essentially appoints a shliach to pick up the item he's borrowing, and then it dies in the possession of the shliach, so that's the shoel's problem. We follow the same rule at the time that the shoel is returning the item. Amar Rafram bar Papa, Amar Rav Chisda. Rafram bar Papa said that Rav Chisda said, Lo shanu ela she'achzira b'sochi me'she'elta. This halacha is true only when he's returning it during the time of the actual loan. Aval li'achari me'she'elta. But once the loan is over, so pater, at that moment he already becomes pater. It's the responsibility of the owner at that point to retrieve his item. And Rashi explains, Tanan Hasam, we learned in the Mishnah over there, Lakamon v'perak HaShoel. This is later on in Perak HaShoel. Amar lo HaShoel, Shalacho sali b'yad avdecho shluchacha. If the Shoel says, send it with your servant or with your shliach, v'shilcha v'meis, he does that, he sends it and it dies, kedarka, normal death, b'derech, on the road, kodem shetikonis lebesu, before it gets to the house of the Shoel, chayiv b'onsim, the Shoel is chayiv in that accident, shemishashem masro l'shlucho, b'mitzvahs HaShoel, because the moment he gave it to his agent at the command of the borrower, nischayiv HaShoel b'onsi, the Shoel is now chayiv in all onsim, in all accidents. V'im lo amar lo shalach, now if the Shoel didn't say send it, el hamashel shalchalo, but it's just the mashel that just sent it to him, kisha amar lo zeh hashileni parascha, when this other person said, lend me your cow, amar lo hein, he said yes, v'amad v'shilcha, and he goes ahead and sends it, v'meisa b'derech, and it dies on the road, pater is pater, meaning to say, the Shoel is only responsible if he gave the instruction to send it in that fashion. V'chein b'shashem achzir, the same is true when the Shoel is returning it. In masra Shoel yad hashliach, let's say the borrower gives it to the hand of an agent, la shiva lebala, to return it to the owner, v'lo amar hamashil shilcha li biad ploni, but the mashal never said send it with so and so. V'meis, and it dies chayiv, so then he's chayiv. The lo kamen b'rishu, say the mashal, it didn't really get back to the mashal yet. And then we said on that Mishnah, this was a statement from Rav Chisda, lo shanu shashoel chayiv b'ad shetavo liyad hamashil. We only say that the shoel is chayiv until it gets to the mashal. Ela shechzira b'sochim eshilta. That's only if he's returning it during the time of the loan. Shamar le hashileni ad zman ploni. He says, lend it to me until such and such a date. V'echzira b'soch hazman. Then he's trying to return it before the date. There, the borrowing didn't really stop until it gets to the owner. But let's say the term of the loan had already stopped, so the shoel is pater. Even in the house of the shoel, even if it dies there, once the term ends, he's not considered to be a borrower on the animal any longer. And so the Gemara continues, Meisiv Rav Nachman bar Papa. Rav Nachman bar Papa asks from our Mishnah, V'chulan shamru tola shelcha v'havei mos shomer chinam. It says that if the craftsmen say, take what is yours and bring money, at that point, they're no longer a shomer sachar, they're a shomer chinam. And Rashi explains, V'chulan shamru taima dugali daite shena chafetz lioso shomer aleh. The only reason the shmira ends is because the person revealed, he stated that he no longer wants to be a shomer, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Aleph Amud Aleph.